Guten Tag, willkommen zurück in der Deutschklasse. Ich bin Ihr Professor, Herr Dr. Professor Michael Hughes und wir lernen hier bei Castet San Marcos. Der Zweck unseres Videos heute ist, von Modalverben im Deutschen und Englischen zu sprechen. Hello, welcome back to the German class. I'm your professor, Dr. Michael Hughes. We're here at Cal State San Marcos learning about modal verbs in German and in English. We're going to start with English, run through sort of the general properties of modal verbs, and then we'll switch to what the grammar of German looks like. These are super useful verbs in German in particular, but also in English for talking about all kinds of things like opinions and needs and obligations and wants and stuff like that. So we're going to want to learn them. So let's start by talking about different kinds of verbs in the world. So there's two sort of overarching categories of verbs. Those are main verbs and auxiliary verbs. And for Germanic languages in general, right? English and German will both share these properties. So main verbs, also called content verbs. Almost all of the verbs in the world are content verbs, and they have a clear meaning, right? Those are things like run, jump, fly, see, hear, do. Um, and auxiliary verbs, on the other hand, also called helping verbs, are basically there to carry the grammatical load, right? So the meaning that they have is much more a grammatical meaning than it is talking about things that are actions in the real world, right? There's about 15 to 20 auxiliary verbs, depending on how you count and whether you want to include things like ought to or dare to in the auxiliary verb category. But despite the fact that there's not very many of them compared to the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of content verbs, they're super high frequency. So usually more than 30% of actual verb tokens in sentences and conversations, up to sometimes maybe 50%. Right. So all questions in English have auxiliary verbs. All negatives in English have auxiliary verbs. And then we've already talked about things like he is going or he has seen, right? There's an auxiliary verb in each one of those. So lots and lots of auxiliaries are popping up all over the place. And also true in German. So we're going to need to practice them. Here's just a diagram of just how this works, right? We've talked about different kinds of verbs. In the main verb category, we've talked about verbs that don't take an object, which are intransitive. Verbs that do take an object, right? So he sleeps, that's it. He hugged his mom. He ate a pizza, right? And then ditransitive have an object and indirect object. So give the present to your friend, right? Or throw the ball to your brother, something like that, right? In our auxiliary verbs, we can split into two categories as well. I've got helping verbs, be, have, and do, and then our list of modal verbs here, all of which are paired historically with the exception of must. Okay, again in English, looking at helping verbs, we need English for whatever reason. In most languages and Indo-European languages and all the Germanic languages, typically you can just switch or reverse the order of the subject and the verb, and you get a question, right? So something like we might have had in Old English, even though you can't say today "play she football," you might have said "play she football" 500 years ago, right? But in modern English, everybody does he play or does she play football, right? And then again, to negate it, we need that does. We can't directly negate the verb. We can't say she playing at football. Though again, like most other European languages, historically, we could have said in English, she playeth not football. Um, Here's another one, right? He's running, and again, you notice you can switch the tense of the auxiliary verbs to get a past tense. He was running, present tense. He is running, and a future. He will be running. And again, questions and negation just land right on the auxiliary verb. Right? And then this is the perfect tense, right? So, and have is our auxiliary verb here. Have they seen the movie? They haven't seen the movie. Again, we need that auxiliary verb for questions and negatives. See what you think about this sentence here. They haven't a penny to their name. That doesn't sound very American English, right? That sounds pretty English, or say British English. In English, we have two haves, right? There's the have that's this helping verb, and there's another have that is just a main verb that means to possess, right? So he has $10. You can't really say has he $10. You would have to say does he have $10. Okay. Now let's look at modal verbs. Modal verbs typically talk about ability and obligation. They're different from main verbs and other auxiliary verbs or the helping verbs in a couple of ways. For instance, they don't take S, right? So you'd say I have, you have, he has, right? Or I work, you work, he works. Not in English, right? So not with the modal verbs. You can't say he shoulds, he mights, or something like that. But as we pointed out already with main verbs, it's possible. They don't co-occur, even though semantically they could, right? So it's hard in probably the dialect that you speak to say he might could do something. Um, but you could say that meaning with a different set of words, right? You can say he might be able to, right? So can, could both basically mean be able to or was able to. There are dialects in English that allow things like he might, could, um, but probably not yours. But maybe it's coming to a dialect near you soon. Modal verbs express deontic modality, right, or basically obligation. So things like you must brush your teeth. And again, in English, we would typically use have to, right? You have to brush your teeth, but there's an obligation established right there. She should study more. That's a weaker obligation, right? It's must or have to is a strong obligation. And then you also have epistemic modality, which talks about probability. So, for instance, well, he must be. I don't know where he is. I know he was complaining about toothache. He must be at the dentist. Right? Or, well, I know he's not doing well in his German class, so he should be at the library studying, but I'm not really sure, right? So these are logical deductions, not necessarily obligation in this sense, right? Okay, good. So they're nice, they're flexible, and they're very grammatical, right? They're their own class all by themselves. Okay, now let's talk about structure of the English sentence, right? We're going to see in German, German likes to split its verbs up. English is not that way. English just stacks them all up one after the other. Although you will notice that the main verb or the content verb is always at the end of the row of verbs in English, right? So I have a simple one like they eat pizza. Eats our content verb. We know what eat means, right? Obviously, it's a content verb. They are eating the pizza, right? So are is our auxiliary verb, and then the second comes right, they have eaten, they have been eating, right? So here I'm smashing together both of these two sentences, right? They have and they are, and to get the uh, present perfect progressive. They will eat the pizza. There's our modal verb here as our aux. They will have eaten the pizza. There I'm smashing together the future or the modal and um, the present perfect. They will have been eating the pizza. That's the modal perfect progressive. And then you can make that whole thing passive if you want to, and you can get 5 verbs all in a row in English and say the pizza will have been being eaten by them. Right? And again, so once just to notice, right, the main verb is still always at the end of the row of verbs, but not necessarily at the end of the sentence, right? The object is coming after the verbs in English. Okay, so let's switch to German real quick and see what we can see. Thinking about German verbs. The overall system for German is fairly similar, except it's got some holes in it compared to the English system, right? So there's no do auxiliary in German, right? Like I said, in German, if you want to question, geht, um, geht zum Markt, you can just say geht zum Markt. Right? You can just switch the subject and the object. There's machen and tun, right? Do you can express do, right? So er macht gut, he's doing well, and tun also mean do, but they don't work like auxiliary verbs. They're not helping verbs. They're just regular content verbs. There's no ing form in German, so you can't. There is an ing form in German, but it doesn't really work the way the English one does, and it's not very common at all. So you can't say er ist machen, right? He is doing something. It doesn't make sense. You just say er macht das, and that means either means he does it or he is doing it, depending on context. Um, right, er schläft gut means would be translated either as he sleeps well or he is sleeping well. Again, depending on context, or if you added a time word or something like that, you could clarify it. And there's no equivalent of English will in the modal sense, right? The will in German means to want, and if you want to use will in the future tense, you're going to use the verb werden. And we'll see that really briefly, but that's not really the topic of this discussion, right? Okay, so the helping verbs in German, Hilfsverben. Haben, ihr habt es schon gemacht. This is how you make the past tense in German. It's called das Perfekt, right? So y'all have it already done, right? And again, German only has this one form. This is ambiguous between you've already done it and you already did it. Again, context was king. Sein, right, which is English to be, schon angekommen. This is an alternate of the past, the perfect. And then werden, right, which we talked about is what we want to do if we want to talk about the future. Er wurde verhaftet, he was arrested, right? Oh, sorry, here, in this case, actually, we're not using it in the perfect, we're using it in the passive form. If the police arrested him, er wurde verhaftet. Wird morgen verhaftet, he will be arrested in the future. So werden is a useful verb to know. Right? And if you're looking for a book to read that's sometimes frustrating but is a classic of world literature, go ahead and look for Kafka's Der Prozess or The Trial in English. Okay, what are the modal verbs? Again, right, we saw them before in English: may, might, can, could, shall, should, will, would, and must. It's this very similar set in German, um, except, like I said, the equivalent for will is not a modal verb in German, it's werden, to become. Anyway, dürfen, go ahead and say that, dürfen, right? So that's like an E sound, E, but you make your lips round, leave your tongue where it is, and you go from E, right? Dürfen. Dürfen. That means may or be allowed to. So man darf im Klassenzimmer nicht rauchen, right? That means one may not smoke in the classroom, or one's not allowed to smoke in the classroom. Können, which means to be able to, or English can, right? Kann gut Deutsch sprechen. Kann gut Deutsch sprechen means he can speak German well. Mögen means to like, and English, right? To like is not a part of the modal verbs, right? So you can add or subtract from that category if you want, depending on the language. So mögen means to like, mögen. So this O with an umlaut, right, for können und mögen, is like the A sound, but with rounded lips. So right, like A, right, your tongue's in the front, but in the middle of your mouth, and then you just round your lips from A, right? That's mögen, to like. So sie mag morgens Tee trinken means she likes to drink tea in the mornings. Müssen, müssen, again, must or have to. It's more common for us in English probably say to have to. Wir müssen bald in die Arbeit gehen means we have to go to work real soon, right? We must soon in the work go. Sollen is should, so typically weak obligation. Und Sie sollen nicht zu viel Bier trinken. Oh, and then wollen, right? Which means to want. Again, in English, that's not part of the modal system, but such is life. Wir wollen eine Party veranstalten, right? We want to throw a party. So we want a party to throw. Okay, good. Let's look at that. Right, we talked about the where verbs were with respect to each other in English, right? In English, they're all really friendly. They all just stack up right next to each other. In German, verbs don't like each other. They want to be as far apart and unique as possible, right? So you have something like "Du musst Brot backen," right? You must bread bake, right? You have to bake the bread, or you have to bake some bread, right? Du musst morgen Brot backen. You must tomorrow bread bake. Du musst morgen früh Brot backen. And notice every time I add a word, the verbs are getting farther and farther apart. Du musst morgen früh mit deiner Cousine Brot backen. You have to bake bread with your cousin tomorrow early. Und du musst morgen früh mit deiner Cousine aus Wiesbaden Brot backen, right? So you have to um, you have to bake bread tomorrow morning with your cousin from Wiesbaden, right? And again, you can make this longer and longer and longer if you want, and you can find more words to stick in that sentence. And whatever happens, you're going to get müssen in the second spot, and you're going to get the main verb all the way at the end, right? And it doesn't matter which one you can choose. All of these müssens or muss can be replaced by darfst, kannst, magst, sollst, und willst, right? You may, you can, you want to, you should, and you again, you want, or you like, you should, and you want to. There's Wiesbaden. There's the city symbol. It's the capital of Hesse, which is here. It's not a very big city, but there's a couple other big cities in Hesse that you might want to. Well, probably won't, the super industrial, maybe not the most touristy. Anyway, if I want to use werden to talk about the future, again, not the topic of this, but I brought it up, so I'll just show you. Right, ich werde Brot backen. The pattern is going to be the same. Right, your V2 has got your auxiliary verb, and right before the end of the sentence, right before the period, is where your main verb comes in. Right, ich werde Brot backen. I'm going to bake some bread. Du wirst morgen Brot backen. You're going to bake some bread tomorrow. Sie wird morgen früh Brot backen. She's going to bake bread early tomorrow. Wir werden morgen früh mit deiner Cousine Brot backen. We're going to bake bread tomorrow morning with your cousin. Right? Und ihr werdet morgen früh mit deiner Cousine aus Wiesbaden Brot backen. Y'all are gonna bake bread tomorrow early with your cousin from Wiesbaden. Okay, and even if we go into the right, so in the future they don't like each other, and even if we go to the past, German verbs don't like each other then either, right? So, and that's perfect, which we're going to be working on a lot in German 102. Ich habe dein Geld gestohlen, right? And so here's our V2, right? Our auxiliary verb is haben, our object, and then this is our main verb. So this is I have your money stolen, right? Presumably that's where they're fighting. Du hast mich betrogen, right? You have me betrayed. Sie hat nur mich geliebt. She only loved me. Right? Again, haben in the second spot, the verb at the very end. Wir haben miteinander gekämpft. We have with each other fought, right? Or we fought each other. Verb all the way at the end, V2 for the ox. Ihr habt uns zugeschaut. You all watched us, right? And this is a separate prefix verb, so zugeschaut. You watched us, or looked on, or something like that would be a good translation. Haben Sie mit Ihrem Freund gestritten? Did you, sir or ma'am, with your sir or ma'am's friend, fought or argued, right? Did you fight with your friend, ma'am or sir? Okay, right. So we see the same pattern for modal verbs, the same pattern for the future tense with werden, and the same pattern for the past tense with haben, right? The auxiliary verb in the second spot, the main verb all the way to the end, right? So just to wrap everything up, Zusammenfassung, right? The grabbing of things together. There are two types of two types of verbs, auxiliaries and content verbs, right? And the auxes break down into helping verbs and modal verbs. In English, we just stack all the verbs up one after the other. In German, we have that V2 thing and the main verb all the way to the end of the sentence. For modal verbs, right? Der Student muss jeden Abend lernen. For the future tense and for das Perfekt, the pattern is all the same, right? Verb second, and then the content verb all the way to the end. You want to study these modal verbs. They're super useful. It's a great construction. It's not super hard, right? The verbs are pretty regular once you learn them. And they're important for talking about things that you have to do, you should do, you ought to do, you may do, and then also things that are possible, right? And so uh, practice these guys. You're going to want to learn them. Okay, that's everything. If you have any questions, talk to me in class, or you're always welcome to meet me in my office hours or make an appointment with me. Just email me at mhughes@csusm.edu or message me through Canvas. All right, viel Glück mit alles. Good luck with everything, and I'll talk to you again soon. Auf Wiedersehen.